The silence was the worst part. Belcara pressed her three-fingered hand against the cold metal wall of the science station and felt the absence of vibration. No engine hum, no power cycling through the conduits. The luminous prospect was dead in space, and everyone aboard knew what that meant. Life support at 42%, announced Mirazeth from the engineering console. The young technician's voice trembled despite her efforts to sound professional. Oxygen reclamation systems are offline. We have 70 hours of breathable air remaining. Captain Thonris stood at the center of the bridge, his tall frame casting shadows in the emergency lighting. His skin had lost its usual blue shimmer and turned a dull gray, a sign of stress that every Kreath could recognize. He did not speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his words were measured and calm. Send the distress beacon on all council frequencies. Include our position and status. Already done, Captain, Belcara said quietly. Beacon has been transmitting for 6 hours, and? She met his eyes. No response. No ships within range. No relay stations detecting our signal. Thonris nodded slowly. He had expected this answer. They all had, though no one wanted to say it aloud. The luminous prospect had been charting the region the Council called the Forgotten Reach, a vast expanse of space where gravitational anomalies made travel dangerous and resources were scarce. No trade routes passed through here. No military patrols ventured this far from civilized space. They were alone. How did this happen? Thonris asked, though he had read the reports 3 times already. Mirazeth pulled up the data on the main screen. We encountered an unexpected gravitic shear. The navigation computer didn't detect it until we were already inside the field. The ship's main reactor tried to compensate for the stress, but the power surge caused a cascade failure across all primary systems. Could we repair it? The reactor core is cracked, Mirazeth said. Even if we had the replacement parts, we don't have the power to run the fabricators. We can't fix what's broken without power, and we can't get power without fixing what's broken. It was a death sentence delivered in technical language. Belcara watched the faces of the bridge crew. Some stared at their stations with false concentration. Others looked at each other with the wide-eyed expression of people confronting their own mortality. There were 47 Kreath aboard this vessel. 47 lives that would end in less than 3 days. We should send messages, said Thonris quietly. Personal messages to our families. While we still have time. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. This was an admission of defeat. No captain wanted to say such things, but Thonris was honest above all else. He would not give his crew false hope. The beacon will continue transmitting, he continued. Perhaps someone will find this ship someday. Perhaps they will recover our logs and messages. Our families will at least know what happened to us. Belcara felt something cold settle in her chest. She had a partner waiting for her back on the homeworld. 2 children who would grow up without their mother. She had told them this assignment would only take 6 months. She had promised to return in time for the Festival of Light. She would not keep that promise. The crew dispersed to their quarters, each person seeking privacy to record their final words. Belcara remained on the bridge with Thonris and Mirazeth. The young engineer was crying now, no longer bothering to hide it. I'm sorry, Mirazeth whispered. I should have seen the anomaly sooner. I should have... Stop, Thonris said firmly but not unkindly. This is not your fault. The gravitic shear was invisible to our sensors until we were already inside it. No one could have prevented this. Belcara placed a hand on Mirazeth's shoulder. The captain is right. We all knew the risks of deep space exploration. This is simply an unfortunate outcome. Unfortunate. Such a small word for something so final. Hours passed. The crew moved through the ship like ghosts, speaking in whispers when they spoke at all. Some gathered in the common areas, seeking comfort in companionship. Others isolated themselves, preferring to face the end alone. The air grew stale as the recycling system struggled to keep pace with declining power levels. Belcara sat at her science station, reviewing sensor data without really seeing it. It was something to do, something to occupy her mind other than thinking about suffocating in the dark. That was when she noticed it. Captain, she called out, her voice sharp with sudden attention. I'm detecting an energy signature. Thonris was at her side in 3 long strides. A ship? Unknown. The signature is... strange. Not consistent with any council vessel I'm familiar with. She adjusted the sensors, trying to clear the interference from the surrounding gravitic fields. It's moving. Coming toward us. Miraseth rushed to the sensor station, hope blazing in her eyes. Distance? Approximately 4 light hours. They must have detected our beacon. Velkara felt her own hope rising despite her efforts to remain rational. At their current speed, they could reach us in 17 hours. Can we identify the ship? Thonris demanded. Velkara worked the controls, trying to penetrate the sensor interference. The energy signature was unusual. Lower frequency than council vessels typically used, with power fluctuations that seemed almost random. Finally, the computer managed to match the signature against the database. The result made her breath catch. Human, she said quietly. The word seemed to suck all sound from the bridge. Thonris stared at the display. Miraseth's expression shifted from hope to confusion to something that might have been disappointment. Human? The captain repeated. Velkara nodded, pulling up what little information the database contained. A probationary species. They were granted limited access to council space approximately 50 standard years ago, but they failed integration protocols. They're restricted to fringe territories and have limited contact with civilized space. Why did they fail integration? Miraseth asked. Velkara scanned the notes. Multiple reasons. Excessive emotional decision-making, disregard for established hierarchies, failure to adopt efficient resource allocation models. They're considered reckless, primitive in their approach to technology and diplomacy. Thonris was silent for a long moment. Velkara could see the conflict on his face. They were dying. Help was coming, but that help came from a species the Council had essentially rejected as unworthy of full membership in galactic civilization. Pride warred with survival. They answered our beacon, Thonris finally said. They're coming to help us. We don't know that, Velkara cautioned. We don't know why they're approaching. What else would they be doing out here? Miraseth asked. There's nothing in this region. No resources, no trade routes. They must be responding to our distress call. Thonris looked at the energy signature on the screen. A human ship, traveling through space that council vessels avoided because it was too dangerous and too empty to be worth the risk, coming toward a stranded vessel crewed by a species that had deemed humans unworthy. Open a communication channel, he ordered. Let's find out what they want. The signal took hours to travel across the distance between ships. The crew waited in tense silence. Life support was now at 37%. They had 63 hours of air remaining. When the response finally came, it was in heavily accented but understandable galactic standard. This is Captain Marcus Webb of the United Earth exploratory ship Wandering Star. We received your distress beacon. What is your situation? The voice was rough, direct, and completely without pretense. No formal greetings. No diplomatic protocols. Just a simple question asking what they needed. Thonris glanced at Velkara, then responded. This is Captain Thonris of the Kriath vessel Luminous Prospect. Our ship suffered catastrophic system failure. Life support is failing. We have 47 crew members who will die in less than 3 days without assistance. Another long wait for the signal to travel. When the response came, it was even simpler than before. Understood. We're coming to get you. Hold on, no hesitation. No questions about payment or diplomatic complications. Just a promise to help. Velkara stared at the communication console. Beside her, Miraseth was crying again, but this time with relief rather than despair. Thonris straightened his shoulders. Prepare the crew for potential rescue operations. And someone find out everything we can about humans. I want to know who we're dealing with. The Luminous Prospect drifted silently in the dark, its beacon still calling out into the void. But now, for the first time since the disaster began, there was something other than despair aboard the vessel. There was hope. The human ship was smaller than Velkara expected. She watched the approaching vessel on the main display, studying its design with growing confusion. The hull was angular and utilitarian, with none of the elegant curves that characterized council ships. Exposed conduits ran along the exterior like scars. The engine configuration seemed inefficient, wasting energy in ways that would horrify any proper engineer. Yet it was moving through the gravitic anomaly field that had destroyed the Luminous Prospect, as if the dangerous space was merely inconvenient rather than deadly. How are they doing that? Miraseth whispered, her eyes fixed on the sensor readouts. Their shields shouldn't be able to handle these gravitational fluctuations. The power requirements alone would... They're not using shields the way we do, Velkara interrupted, studying the data. They're adjusting constantly, making thousands of tiny corrections every second instead of maintaining a stable field. It's incredibly inefficient, but it's working. Thonris stood with his arms crossed, watching the human vessel approach. Can we establish visual communication? Attempting now, said the communications officer. The screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at the bridge of the human ship. Velkara felt a moment of surprise at how crude it appeared. The walls were bare metal. The stations looked old and worn. Everything seemed to be held together with what humans apparently considered acceptable engineering standards. But the crew looked alert and focused. And the man in the captain's chair wore an expression of calm confidence. Captain Thonris, the human said, nodding slightly. I'm Marcus Webb. Good to finally see you folks. Webb appeared to be in his middle years by human standards. His skin was dark, his hair was cut short and showing gray at the temples, and his face bore the lines of someone who spent more time frowning in concentration than smiling. He wore a simple uniform with minimal decoration. Captain Webb, Thonris replied formally. We are grateful for your response to our distress call. We were not expecting anyone in this region. Yeah, well, we heard someone needed help. Webb shrugged, a gesture that Velkara recognized from the cultural database as indicating casual acceptance. We were doing a survey 3 sectors over when we picked up your beacon. Figured we'd take a look. 3 sectors, Velkara said before she could stop herself. That's a considerable distance to travel for a distress call. Webb looked at her directly. His eyes were a strange pale color that the database labeled as gray. Someone needed help. We were close enough to respond. Everything else is just noise. The simplicity of the statement left Velkara momentarily speechless. Thonris recovered more quickly. What are your intentions, Captain Webb? Intentions? Webb raised one eyebrow. We're going to get your people off that dying ship and take you somewhere safe. What else would we be doing? We have no way to compensate you for this service, Thonris said carefully. The Luminous Prospect carries scientific equipment but nothing of significant trade value. Did I ask for payment? Webb's tone was not hostile, just genuinely confused. You folks are in trouble. We're going to help. That's the whole story. Behind the captain, Velkara could see other humans moving around the bridge. They were diverse in appearance. Different skin tones, different features, different builds. One woman with dark hair tied back was studying a display intently. A younger man with very dark skin was working at what appeared to be an engineering station. Captain, the young man called out, I'm reading structural damage to their hull around the reactor section. We're going to need to be careful about how we approach the docking procedure. Good catch, Jimmy. Webb turned back to the screen. Captain Thonris, we're going to need detailed scans of your ship's structural integrity. Can you transmit that data? Of course. Thonris gestured to Mirazeth, who quickly sent the information. Velkara watched the humans work. They moved efficiently, but without the rigid formality she was used to seeing on council vessels. They called each other by what appeared to be personal names rather than ranks. The captain himself seemed to treat his crew as equals rather than subordinates. It was highly irregular. Captain Webb, Velkara said, May I ask what brought your vessel to this region? The Forgotten Reach is not considered valuable territory. Webb smiled slightly. That's exactly why we're here. Council species map what's profitable. We map what's unknown. Sometimes the two overlap. Usually they don't. We're okay with that. But there's no economic benefit to exploring empty space. Economic benefit isn't the only kind of benefit. Webb gestured to something off-screen. We've cataloged 17 new stellar phenomena in this region alone. Found traces of 6 extinct civilizations. Discovered 4 planets that might support life with proper terraforming. We're learning things nobody else knows because nobody else bothers to look. Mirazeth leaned forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her fear. You explore just to learn? Without any practical application? Sometimes the practical applications come later, the woman with dark hair said, joining the conversation. She had a gentle voice with a different accent than Webb's. Sometimes they don't. Either way, knowledge has value. This is Dr. Keiko Tanaka, Webb introduced, our chief medical officer. She's going to coordinate medical support for your crew during the transfer. Tanaka smiled warmly. I've been reviewing Kriath physiology from our database. I'll admit our information is limited, but I'm a quick learner. If any of your crew are injured, I'll do my best to help. Velkara felt something twist in her chest. The human doctor was promising to treat patients whose biology she barely understood. It was either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, possibly both. We have 12 injured crew members, Thonris said. Most suffered trauma during the initial reactor failure. Our medical officer has stabilized them, but our equipment is running on emergency power. We'll take care of them, Tanaka said simply. The wandering star drew closer. Velkara watched on the sensors as the human ship navigated through gravitational eddies that would have torn a lesser vessel apart. The corrections the humans made looked random, almost instinctive, but they worked. Prepare for docking procedures, Webb announced. Jimmy, you're on EVA duty. Take Chen and Rodriguez with you. Copy that, Captain. The young man, Jimmy, stood from his station. We'll get a hard line established and start the transfer as soon as possible. Velkara accessed the human cultural database again, searching for information about the species. The file was surprisingly sparse. Humans had emerged into galactic space 50 standard years ago, bringing with them technology that was functional but crude compared to Council standards. They had been eager to join the galactic community, but the integration had failed. The official report cited numerous problems. Humans refused to abandon their inefficient technologies in favor of Council standards. They insisted on maintaining diverse cultural practices rather than adopting unified protocols. They rejected the Council's resource allocation models as inhumane. Most damning of all, humans refused to accept the concept of acceptable losses. The Council had demonstrated through extensive mathematical modeling that certain rescue operations cost more resources than they saved. It was simple efficiency. Attempting to save everyone everywhere was not sustainable. Humans had looked at those calculations and said no. They had been categorized as a probationary species and restricted to fringe territories. The expectation was that they would either adopt proper civilized standards or fade into obscurity. Instead, they had continued doing things their own way. We're in position, Webb announced. Beginning docking approach. Velkara watched the human ship maneuver alongside the luminous prospect. The docking procedure was unorthodox, using magnetic clamps and physical tethers instead of the standard gravitational coupling. It looked primitive. It also worked perfectly. Docking successful, Jimmy reported. I'm suiting up now. Negative, Webb said. Environmental conditions around the docking port are too unstable. We're reading gravitational fluctuations that could tear the umbilical. I can handle it, Captain. Jimmy, sir, with respect, I've done EVA work in worse conditions. Remember the plasma storm incident on Kepler 442? Jimmy was already moving toward the airlock. I've got this, Webb sighed heavily. Fine, but you take every precaution. The moment conditions deteriorate, you get back inside. Understood. Velkara felt a chill run through her. She pulled up the environmental data around the docking area. The gravitational shear was fluctuating wildly. Any being attempting to work in that environment would be subjected to forces that could literally pull them apart. Your crew member cannot survive those conditions, she said urgently. Webb looked at her. Jimmy knows what he's doing. The gravity fluctuations alone are dangerous, yeah. Webb's expression was calm. But we need to establish a stable connection to transfer your crew. Someone has to go outside and do it manually. That someone is Jimmy because he's the best EVA specialist I've got. You're sending him to his death. I'm sending him to do his job. There's a difference. Webb turned to another screen. Jimmy, you're on comm. Let us know what you see. The screen split, showing Jimmy's helmet camera view. He was already in the airlock, checking his suit seals. The suit itself looked bulky and crude compared to Council EVA equipment. The evacuation began immediately. Miraseth found herself standing in the docking umbilical between the two ships, surrounded by humans who worked with controlled urgency. The umbilical itself was a testament to human engineering philosophy. It looked crude and improvised, held together with what appeared to be reinforced cables and magnetic clamps, but it was solid and functional. Easy does it, said a human woman with short red hair. Her name tag read Rodriguez. She helped guide an injured Kriath crew member through the connection. Doc Tanaka's waiting for you on the other side. Miraseth followed the wounded through into the wandering star. The interior was as utilitarian as the exterior. Bare metal walls, exposed conduits, lighting that was slightly too bright and slightly too white. But it was warm, and she could feel the steady vibration of a working engine through the deck plates. It felt alive in a way the luminous prospect had not felt for hours. Dr. Tanaka met them in what was clearly the medical bay. The room was small but efficiently organized. The human doctor moved among the injured Kriath with gentle confidence, her hands steady as she examined each patient. "I need to understand your physiology," she said to the Kriath medical officer, an older male named Venthar. "My database information is limited. What should I prioritize?" Venthar looked startled to be consulted so directly. On council ships, physicians followed strict protocols and hierarchies. The most critical cases are suffering from oxygen deprivation and thermal shock. Their circulatory systems are beginning to fail. "Show me." Tanaka pulled up a display screen. "What does a healthy Kriath circulatory system look like?" For the next 10 minutes, Mirazeth watched as Venthar explained Kriath biology, and Tanaka absorbed the information with remarkable speed. The human doctor asked precise questions, made quick notes, and immediately began adapting her equipment. "This won't be perfect," Tanaka said, preparing treatment for the first patient, "but it should stabilize them until we reach proper facilities." "You're attempting to treat a species you knew nothing about 15 minutes ago," Venthar said quietly. Tanaka smiled. "That's what being a doctor means. You learn fast, adapt faster, and do your best with what you have. Besides, biology has patterns. Once you understand the patterns, you can work with variations." Back at the docking umbilical, the evacuation continued. Velkara supervised the transfer of critical equipment and data cores. She watched as humans and Kriath worked side by side, the two species finding ways to communicate despite their differences. Jimmy Okonkwo appeared beside her, his EVA suit removed and replaced with a simple work coverall. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Your ship's structural integrity is worse than we thought. The reactor containment is starting to fail. How long do we have? Maybe 6 hours before it breaches. When it does, the resulting explosion will destroy both ships if we're still connected." Velkara felt her breath catch. "Can we accelerate the evacuation?" "We are accelerating it. But you've got 47 crew members and a lot of critical equipment to move." Jimmy pulled up a display on his portable unit. "Plus, there's another problem. Your ship is too damaged to move under its own power, and the Wandering Star can't tow you through this gravitic field." "Then what do you suggest?" Jimmy looked at her directly. His eyes were dark brown and completely serious. "We strip your ship of anything essential and leave the rest behind. It's the only way to get everyone out safely before the reactor goes critical." "Leave the ship?" Velkara repeated. "The Luminous Prospect is the first Kriath vessel to successfully chart this region. The data we've collected, the equipment we've developed, can be replaced. Your lives can't." Jimmy's tone was firm but not unkind. "Look, I understand this is your ship. I get that it means something. But it's a pile of metal and circuits. You and your crew are living beings. There's no comparison." Velkara wanted to argue, but she could not find the words. The human was right, and she knew it. Captain Webb's voice came through the shipwide communication system. "All hands, this is the captain. We're accelerating evacuation procedures. Priority is now on personnel transfer. Grab what you can carry, but don't risk your lives for equipment. We're on a clock, people." Thonris appeared in the corridor, his expression grim. "You heard the human captain. All crew members are to evacuate immediately. Bring only personal items and essential data cores. Everything else stays behind." The words clearly pained him. Velkara knew what this ship meant to her captain. It was his first command, his pride, his legacy. Abandoning it would haunt him for the rest of his life. But he was doing it anyway to save his crew. The evacuation became a controlled chaos. Kriath crew members moved through the dying ship, gathering what they could. Some carried data storage units. Others clutched personal belongings, photos of families, cultural artifacts, small mementos of lives lived far from this cold place. Mirazeth found herself working alongside human engineers to disconnect critical systems. They needed to salvage what they could without compromising the evacuation timeline. "Hand me that plasma spanner," said a human man with graying hair and a thick accent. His name tag read Chen. Mirazeth looked at the toolkit, confused. "Which one is the plasma spanner?" "The blue one." "No, the other blue one." "Yeah, that's it." Chen took the tool and began working on a panel. You folks have good taste in sensor arrays. This equipment is top-notch. It was custom designed for deep space survey work, Miraseth said, feeling a small flush of pride despite the circumstances. Thought so. The calibration is beautiful. Chen carefully disconnected the sensor core. Shame about the ship, but at least we can save this. Your next vessel will have a hell of a sensor suite. If there is a next vessel, Miraseth said quietly. This failure may end the Kriath deep space program. Chen looked at her sharply. This wasn't a failure. You survived impossible conditions long enough for rescue to arrive. Your crew kept their heads and worked the problem. That's not failure, that's triumph. We lost our ship. Ships can be rebuilt. People can't. Chen secured the sensor core in a transport container. Trust me, I've been doing this work for 20 years. The measure of a crew isn't whether they avoid disaster. It's how they handle it when disaster comes. Your crew handled it well. The words stayed with Miraseth as she continued working. Around her, humans moved with practiced efficiency, treating the salvage operation as if they had done it 100 times before. Perhaps they had. In the medical bay, Dr. Tanaka had stabilized all 12 injured crew members. Venthar watched her work with an expression caught between amazement and professional jealousy. Your medical technology is less advanced than ours, he said, but your results are equivalent. Technology is just tools, Tanaka replied, monitoring a patient's vital signs. What matters is knowing how to use them, and being willing to improvise. When the tools aren't quite right for the job, you improvise medical treatment for a species you'd never treated. Before, I had a good teacher. Tanaka smiled at him. You explained what I needed to know clearly and concisely. That made all the difference. Venthar blinked slowly, a sign of surprise in Kriath body language. You credit me with your success? Of course. Medicine isn't something one person does alone. It's collaborative. The more we share knowledge, the better we all become at saving lives. On the bridge of the Wandering Star, Captain Webb monitored the evacuation progress. Beside him, Velkara and Thonris watched their ship appear on the display screens, wounded, dying, but still broadcasting its identity to the void. 32 crew members transferred, reported Rodriguez from her station. 15 still aboard the Prospect. Estimate 20 minutes until complete evacuation. The reactor? Webb asked. Degrading faster than projected. We have maybe 4 hours before critical failure, probably less. Then we work faster. Webb turned to Thonris. Captain, I need your remaining crew to move now. Tell them to leave everything except themselves behind. We're out of time for salvage operations. Thonris nodded and activated his comm unit, giving the order in the Kriath language. His voice was steady, but Velkara could hear the pain beneath the words. The final crew members came through the umbilical in a rush. Engineers, scientists, support staff, all of them leaving behind the ship that had been their home and workplace. Some had tears on their faces, others looked numb with shock. Last crew member aboard, Jimmy reported. Disconnecting the umbilical now. Wait, Thonris said suddenly. The ship's log. We didn't retrieve it. Where is it? Webb asked. The main computer core on the bridge. It contains all our mission data, all our findings. I'll get it, Jimmy said, already moving toward the airlock. Negative, Webb said firmly. We're out of time. Captain, I can be there and back in 5 minutes. Jimmy. 5 minutes, sir. I'll use the express route. Before Webb could respond, Jimmy was in the airlock. Velkara watched on the displays as the human engineer launched himself across the gap between ships, using only his suit's small maneuvering thrusters. Damn it. Jimmy. Webb muttered, but there was no real anger in his voice, only concern. Velkara held her breath as Jimmy disappeared into the luminous prospect. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Around her, the human crew watched their fellow officers' progress on their displays. The journey to Council Station Epsilon 7 would take 7 days. 7 days aboard a human ship, surrounded by a species the Kriath had been taught to view as lesser beings. 7 days to confront assumptions that had been held for 50 standard years. For Velkara, those assumptions began crumbling almost immediately. It started with dinner. You folks must be hungry, Captain Webb said, appearing in the common area where the Kriath crew had gathered. Our mess hall isn't fancy, but we've got food. Dr. Tanaka checked your dietary requirements. We can accommodate. Miraseth looked around nervously. We do not wish to impose on your resources. Impose? Webb looked genuinely confused. You're eating food. That's not an imposition. That's a basic need. Come on. He led them to the mess hall, a large open space with simple tables and chairs. What struck Velkara immediately was that it was full of human crew members. Not officers dining in a separate area, not enlisted personnel segregated by rank. Everyone eating together in one space. And sitting among them, eating from a standard tray like everyone else, was Captain Webb himself. This is your dining area for command staff? Thonris asked. This is our dining area for everyone, Webb replied, picking up a tray. We're not a big enough ship for separate facilities. Besides, I prefer it this way. You learn more about your crew over a meal than you do from any report. The food was simple but filling. Velkara found herself sitting next to Jimmy Okonkwo, who was enthusiastically eating something he called meatloaf, while explaining the principles of EVA maneuvering to a fascinated Mirazeth. The key is to think in 3 dimensions and trust your instincts, Jimmy said between bites. Calculations are important, but sometimes you need to feel the movement, you know? That sounds highly imprecise, Mirazeth said. It is, but precise doesn't always mean better. Sometimes you need to be adaptable more than you need to be accurate. Jimmy grinned. Like cooking. You can follow a recipe exactly, or you can adjust based on what tastes right. Both approaches have value. Across the table, Dr. Tanaka was speaking with Venthar about medical techniques. The Kriath physician had initially been defensive, clearly expecting the human to dismiss his knowledge. Instead, Tanaka listened intently to everything he said. Fascinating, she said when Venthar explained a surgical technique. We use a similar approach for human patients, but your method is more elegant. Would you mind if I incorporated some of these principles into my practice? Venthar looked stunned. You wish to learn from me? Of course. Why wouldn't I? You've been practicing medicine longer than I've been alive, and you're working with a completely different biological framework. I'd be foolish not to learn from you. Velkara watched the interactions with growing curiosity. The humans treated the Kriath not as rescued refugees or lesser beings, but as equals, as colleagues, as people. It was strange and unsettling and somehow deeply comforting all at once. After dinner, Velkara found Captain Webb on the observation deck, a small area with transparent aluminum viewing ports. He was drinking something from a metal cup and staring out at the stars. May I join you? She asked. Please. Webb gestured to the space beside him. Can't sleep. My sleeping cycle has been disrupted by recent events. Yeah, nearly dying will do that to you. Webb took a sip from his cup. Give it a few days. Your body will adjust. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars slide past. May I ask you something, Captain Webb? Velkara said. Marcus. We're off duty and you're not part of my crew. No need for formality. Marcus, then. Velkara paused, choosing her words carefully. Why are you here? In this region, I mean. The Forgotten Reach offers no strategic value, no economic benefit. Why explore it? Marcus smiled slightly. You're not the first person to ask me that. Council officials always seem confused by the concept of exploring for the sake of exploring. It seems inefficient. Maybe, but efficiency isn't everything. Marcus gestured to the viewport. See those stars? Every single one of them is a mystery. Maybe some have planets. Maybe some of those planets have life, or used to have life, or will have life someday. Maybe they're just balls of gas burning in the void, but we don't know until we look. But what do you gain from knowing? Knowledge, understanding, perspective. Marcus turned to look at her. Your people, the Kriath, you have a rich history, right? Scientists, artists, philosophers. Of course. Did all of them only pursue things with immediate practical value? Or did some of them study the stars just because they wanted to understand the universe? Velkara thought of the ancient Kriath astronomers who had first mapped the night sky, long before space travel was possible. They had gained nothing practical from their work. They had simply wanted to know. I understand your point, she said quietly. Humans are curious, Marcus continued, sometimes recklessly so. We want to see what's over the next hill, around the next corner, beyond the next star. Not because it benefits us, but because it's there and we want to know. The Council considers that a weakness. The Council considers a lot of things weaknesses that I'd call strengths. Marcus's tone was mild, but there was an edge to it, like our rescue doctrine. Your doctrine of never accepting losses. It's not about accepting or not accepting. It's about trying. Marcus set down his cup. The council did a study years back. They calculated the cost of rescue operations in dangerous regions versus the statistical value of the lives saved. They determined that some rescue operations cost more than they save. So those operations shouldn't be attempted. That is logical resource allocation. That's deciding some people are worth saving and others aren't based on a calculation. Marcus's voice was harder now. Humans looked at that math and said no. Every life has value. You don't get to decide someone isn't worth the effort of saving them. But the resources required can be replaced, built, grown, created. People can't. Marcus met her eyes. Your crew was in the Forgotten Reach, a place the council has written off as not worth patrolling. If you'd relied on the council's efficient resource allocation, you'd all be dead right now. The words hit Velkara like a physical blow. He was right. The council had made a calculated decision that rescue operations in the Forgotten Reach were not cost-effective. That decision would have killed her and everyone she served with. We saved your crew because that's what we do, Marcus said. We maintain a watch in places the council ignores. We respond to distress calls others deem not worth answering. We're inefficient and emotional and reckless by council standards. But you're here, Velkara said softly. You came when no one else would. Yeah, we did. Marcus picked up his cup again. The council can call that whatever they want. We call it being human. Over the following days, Velkara observed the human crew more closely. She began to understand what Marcus had meant. The humans worked without the rigid hierarchies that governed council species. Officers and enlisted crew ate together, worked together, even joked with each other. When someone had a better idea, it didn't matter what rank they held. The idea was considered on its merits. Jimmy Okonkwo taught Mirazeth the basics of human engineering philosophy, which he summarized as, if it's stupid but it works, it isn't stupid. They spent hours in the engineering section, cobbling together solutions to problems using whatever materials were available. Dr. Tanaka and Venthar had become something like colleagues, sharing medical knowledge freely. Tanaka showed Venthar human techniques for treating trauma. Venthar explained Krihath approaches to cellular regeneration. Both seemed genuinely delighted by what they were learning. Captain Thonris spent much of his time on the bridge, watching the humans work. Velkara joined him there on the third day of their journey. They are remarkable, Thonris said quietly. I did not expect this. Nor did I. The way they operate, it defies everything we were taught about command structure and efficiency. Yet it works. Thonris gestured to the bridge crew. Rodriguez over there just suggested a course correction to the captain. He didn't dismiss her or assert his authority. He asked her to explain her reasoning, then implemented her suggestion because it was sound. Command through collaboration rather than hierarchy, Velkara observed. It should create chaos. Instead, it creates loyalty. Thonris's voice held a note of wonder. They trust each other completely, not because regulations require it, but because they've earned that trust through actions. That evening, Velkara found Marcus on the observation deck again. It seemed to be his preferred place for contemplation. I've been thinking about what you said, she told him, about the Council's rescue doctrine. And I accessed the records. Over the past 50 years, human ships have responded to 73 distress calls in regions the Council considers unpatrolled. You've saved the lives of over 4,000 beings from 17 different species. Sounds about right. The Council has officially filed complaints about your interference in what they call accepted loss zones. Marcus laughed bitterly. Of course they have. We're making them look bad by doing what they decided wasn't worth doing. Why don't you tell people about this? Why don't you publicize these rescues? Because we don't do it for recognition. We do it because it's right. Marcus looked at her. Council Station Epsilon 7 was everything the Wandering Star was not. The corridors were pristine and perfectly lit. The air was precisely temperature-controlled. Every surface gleamed with the polish of obsessive maintenance. Efficiency radiated from every corner, every system, every interaction. Velkara found it cold and lifeless. A council liaison met them at the docking port, a Theran official named Kosovar with pale purple skin and 4 arms. He carried a data tablet and wore an expression of professional detachment. Captain Thonris, I am here to facilitate your debriefing and return transit, Kosovar said without preamble. Your families have been notified of your survival. Transport to the Kriath homeworld will be arranged within 3 standard days. What about the humans? Miraseth asked. Will they receive recognition for the rescue? Kosovar's expression didn't change. The incident will be logged appropriately. The human vessel will be permitted to resupply at this station before continuing their patrol. Logged appropriately? Velkara repeated. They saved 47 lives, which will be noted in the official record. Kosovar's tone suggested the conversation was concluded. Now if you will follow me, we must begin the debriefing process. The debriefing took 6 hours. Velkara sat in a sterile room and answered questions posed by a panel of 3 officials. They wanted to know about the equipment failure, the ship's last moments, the decision to abandon the vessel. They took detailed notes and cross-referenced everything against the ship's recovered logs. What they did not seem interested in was the human crew of the Wandering Star. The humans demonstrated exceptional skill and bravery, Velkara said, attempting to steer the conversation. Without their intervention, we would have perished. That has been noted, one of the officials said, making a mark on his tablet. However, the primary purpose of this inquiry is to determine if proper protocols were followed by the Kriath crew and whether the loss of the vessel could have been prevented. The loss of the vessel is irrelevant compared to the vessel represented significant resource investment. Its loss must be thoroughly examined. Velkara felt frustration building inside her. They were treating the rescue as a footnote, an inconvenient complication in their assessment of property damage. After the debriefing, she found Thonris in one of the station's rest areas. The captain looked exhausted, his skin dull with fatigue. They barely acknowledged what the humans did, Velkara said, sitting beside him. I noticed. Thonris's voice was flat. The council liaison made it clear to me that this incident should be treated as a fortunate anomaly. They do not wish to draw attention to the fact that a human ship succeeded where council protocols would have left us to die. That's unconscionable. That's politics. Thonris closed his eyes. They're already constructing the narrative. The luminous prospect suffered an unfortunate accident. The crew was rescued by a nearby vessel. End of story. What about the truth? The truth is whatever serves the council's interests. Thonris opened his eyes and looked at her. I was advised not to make public statements that might embarrass the council or complicate humanity's probationary status. They actually said that? In those exact words. Velkara felt anger burning in her chest. This is wrong. Yes, it is. Thonris straightened in his seat, which is why I intend to do something about it. Over the next 2 days, Velkara learned that she was not alone in her determination to speak the truth. Miraseth had already sent detailed accounts to several scientific journals, describing the human engineering techniques that had made the rescue possible. Venthar was preparing a paper on human medical adaptability for publication in the Council Medical Review. Other crew members were sharing their experiences through personal communications and social networks. The official narrative was beginning to crack. On the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. Captain Thonris invoked an ancient protocol, called the right of testimony, a legal mechanism that allowed any citizen to formally address the Greater Council on matters of extraordinary circumstances. It had not been invoked in over 200 years. The Council had no choice but to grant the request. 2 weeks later, Velkara found herself standing in the Greater Council chambers on the Kriath homeworld. The room was vast and circular, with representatives from 47 species seated in ascending tiers. At the center was a raised platform for speakers. Thonris stood on that platform, his formal uniform crisp and perfect, his bearing that of a military officer addressing his commanders. Honored council members, he began, I stand before you today to speak truth about humanity, not the comfortable version found in official reports, but the reality I witnessed firsthand. The chamber was silent. Velkara could feel the tension in the air. 47 members of my crew were dying in deep space. We had sent distress calls that went unanswered, because we were in a region the Council has deemed unworthy of patrol. We had accepted our deaths. Thonris's voice carried clearly through the chamber. Then a human ship responded. He activated a holographic display showing images of the Wandering Star and its crew. These humans navigated conditions that destroyed our vessel. They performed an EVA rescue in gravitational conditions we considered unsurvivable. They treated our injured despite having no prior experience with Kriath physiology. They stripped their own ship of resources to accommodate us. They asked for nothing in return. Kosovar, the council liaison, stood from his seat. Captain Thonris, the council acknowledges that you were rescued. However, this does not what? Thonris interrupted, his voice sharp. Does not change the fact that the council's own protocols would have left us to die? Does not demonstrate that humanity possesses virtues we claim to value but fail to practice? Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Kosovar looked uncomfortable. The humans displayed courage, compassion, ingenuity, and selflessness, Thonris continued. They embodied every principle the council claims makes a species civilized. Yet we have deemed them unworthy of full membership because they refuse to adopt our definition of efficiency. He paused, letting the words settle. I have reviewed the records. Over the past 50 years, human vessels have rescued over 4,000 beings from 17 species in regions we have abandoned as economically unviable. They maintain a presence in dangerous space not for profit, but because someone needs to answer distress calls. They risk their lives for strangers. They leave no one behind. Velkara watched as Thonris pulled up more data, rescue records, testimony from other species, evidence of human aid operations that had never been officially acknowledged. The council has filed complaints about human interference in accepted loss zones, Thonris said, and now his voice carried an edge of anger. Let me be clear about what that means. We have designated entire regions of space as places where rescue operations are not cost-effective. We have calculated the acceptable loss of life and decided some beings are not worth the effort of saving. The chamber erupted in protests and arguments. Thonris waited for the noise to subside. The humans rejected that calculation, he said quietly. They looked at our mathematics and said no. Every life has value. You do not abandon people because saving them is expensive or difficult or inefficient. He gestured to the holographic display, which now showed an image of Captain Webb on the bridge of the Wandering Star. This is Captain Marcus Webb. He told me that humans explore the forgotten regions not because it's profitable, but because it's unknown. He said they respond to distress calls not for recognition, but because it's right. He explained that efficiency isn't everything, that compassion, curiosity, and the stubborn refusal to accept preventable death are also valuable. Thonris turned slowly, looking at the assembled representatives. I ask you now, what is civilization? Is it the efficient management of resources? The maximization of profit? The careful calculation of acceptable losses? He paused. Or is it the willingness to help those in need even when it costs you? The courage to go into dangerous space because someone might need rescue? The compassion to treat strangers as beings of equal worth? Velkara felt tears forming in her eyes. She had never heard anyone speak this way in council chambers. Humanity has been labeled as a probationary species, Thonris concluded. They have been called emotional, inefficient, and reckless. All of these things may be true. But if those traits are what allowed them to save my crew when council protocols would have left us to die, then perhaps we need to reconsider what we value. He deactivated the display and stood silently, waiting. A Theran counselor stood. Captain Thonris, your testimony is passionate. However, the council must consider many factors when evaluating species for full membership. Humanity's technological level, their political stability, their adherence to established protocols. With respect, Counselor, humanity adheres to a protocol more important than any you've mentioned, Thonris said. They help people who need help. If we cannot recognize that as valuable, then our standards are wrong. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Velkara was called to testify, as was Miraseth and Venthar. Each of them described their experiences aboard the Wandering Star. Each of them spoke truth about what they had witnessed.